This case takes place in the United Kingdom in March of 2008. In 2008, two young sisters were enjoying a day at the seaside in Arbroath, Scotland. The day was particularly windy, even by Scottish standards. There had been a vicious storm the night before, resulting in strong waves that day. The two siblings were running and playing along the beach, but as they did this, they noticed something being pushed by the waves onto the shore. The siblings approached and found a plastic bag concealing something inside. Intrigued as to what this could be, the siblings opened the bag with anticipation, but what they found inside has left them with lifelong trauma. Yolanta Bledaite was a 35-year-old woman who lived in the United Kingdom, but she was born in Lithuania. Yolanta's early life was full of hardship and misery. From the start, things for her were very tough. She grew up in abject poverty. Her family lived and worked on a remote farmstead in a rural area of southern Lithuania. Living in such an environment can be challenging enough, but it is known that Yolanta's parents were incredibly dysfunctional. Reports state that she was neglected by those who cared for her, and as a result, her education suffered. By the time she left school, Yolanta required no qualifications. Things were looking rather bleak, as she had no real prospects ahead of her. This hardship was only then compounded when Yolanta's sister left the country in pursuit for a better life. Her sister, Ona, moved to the UK. A few years passed by, and Yolanta decided to follow in her sister's footsteps. She made the bold decision to leave the life she knew, and she moved to another country. Yolanta loved her home country, but there just weren't enough opportunities for her there. The goal was to head to another place, earn some money, and then return home with enough to live a better life. A relatively simple plan, but a plan that would lead to her untimely death. And so in 2006, she made the difficult decision to leave her homeland. First, she moved to Ireland, but sometime later she made her way to the UK. Yolanta found work at various farms, jobs she enjoyed very much and appreciated. Those who knew her stated that Yolanta was incredibly happy in these roles. She worked hard and was saving her paychecks, counting down the days when she would be able to return home. Yolanta had a clear goal in mind, and because of this, she didn't waste any money on drinking. She didn't splurge out on any unnecessary luxuries, and she didn't socialize very much. She kept herself to herself. Eventually, she found herself in a place called Brecon in Scotland, and the area in which she lived was known to be an area where migrants lived and worked. In the UK, many migrants seek work at various farms around the country, and during the early 2000s, there was an influx of Eastern Europeans coming to work on the farms. The majority were law-abiding and worked hard, trying to earn an honest living for their families back home. But a few did also engage in organized crime. Although Yolanta did keep herself to herself, she did make some friends during her time working on the various farms. One of these friends was a fellow Lithuanian migrant, a 20-year-old man named Alex Skeda. Yolanta lived in a humble block of apartments in Brecon. Alex lived in the same block of apartments. The two considered each other to be friends, or at least, Yolanta considered Alex to be her friend. After some time working on the farms, Yolanta had been able to save up a considerable amount of money, around £12,000. Her father was ill at the time, so she had also been sending money back to help care for him. Things were going well. She got along well with the farmers she worked for, as they found her to be a hard-working woman who was reliable and never caused any problems. All she had to do was save a little bit more money and head back home. At some point, Yolanta spoke with Alex, and she told him that she had been able to save up £12,000. She then told him that she was planning to head home relatively soon, back to Lithuania. When Alex heard this, he began to plot. He decided that he wanted to steal Yolanta's hard-earned money, and so he contacted a friend of his, 41-year-old Vitus Plitnicus. Vitus was an incredibly intimidating man with a history of violence. He too worked as a farm labourer, and those who worked with him described him as having a cold personality. Many people found him to be a scary individual. He seemed to have little regard for people's well-being. It is believed that whilst working on these farms, Vitus also engaged in criminal behaviour during his time in the UK. People feared Vitus, and for a good reason. He was born in Lithuania, and he served in the Soviet army. He was even deployed in the Soviet-Afghan War, a particularly brutal war, which resulted in 15,000 Soviet soldiers losing their lives, and over 2 million Afghan civilians were killed. Following this devastating war, Vitus moved to Germany in the early 2000s. For reasons that are unclear, it is said that he wasn't often fond of his fellow Lithuanians. During his time in Germany, Vitus got into an altercation with another man, and this altercation led into a full-blown fight. Tragically, Vitus ended up taking the man's life. He was arrested and was later found guilty of manslaughter. Vitus was sentenced to 7.5 years in a German prison. Following his release from the killing, Vitus somehow made his way to the United Kingdom, where he worked as a farm labourer engaged in crime and met his friend Alex. So, Alex contacted his friend Vitus after hearing that Yolanta had over £12,000 sitting in a bank account. The two conversed and decided how they would go about taking her money. On the 29th of March 2008, Alex and Vitus would go through with their plan. On this day, the two men barged through Yolanta's apartment door while she was home alone. Yolanta was just peacefully reading in her home. She was startled as the two men began to confront her. They demanded that she remain quiet and reassured her that no harm would come to her if she followed their instructions. Vitus took the lead and told Yolanta to hand over her bank card and her PIN number. Yolanta agreed and gave Vitus a PIN number to her card. With this, he rushed out of the apartment and headed to the nearest ATM, whilst Alex stayed at the apartment to keep watch over Yolanta. Vitus pushed the card into the cash machine, entered the PIN, and was met with an incorrect PIN notification. Yolanta had given a fake PIN number. Vitus became enraged. He quickly made his way back to the apartment and told Yolanta that he would kill her if she didn't take this seriously. And with this, Yolanta gave him the correct PIN number. She believed that once the men got their money, they would leave and she would be safe. Vitus left the apartment again. This time, to his relief, the PIN number worked. He checked the balance to see that there was £12,000 in the account, and he attempted to withdraw the money, only to realise that there was a withdrawal limit of only a few £100s a day. Realising that the plan would not work, Vitus returned to the apartment in a violent rage. What exactly happened once Vitus walked through those doors isn't exactly clear, but it is believed that the two men bound and gagged Yolanta and began to brutally torture her. Vitus used a knife to cut into Yolanta's skin. Once the two men had inflicted severe harm and punishment on her, Vitus grabbed a pillow and began to smother her. Yolanta fought back in her last desperate moments, but tragically the two men overpowered her and she lost consciousness. It is unclear if she was killed by the smothering or what was to come next. The two men wasted no time in the disposal of Yolanta's body. Vitus retrieved a saw and other bladed articles, dragged Yolanta into the bathroom, and began to hack through her neck to remove her head, followed by her hands. Vitus wanted to remove the head and hands, as these would be easy ways to identify who she was. Once they were finished cutting up the body, the two men stopped for a moment, placed cigarettes in their mouths, and enjoyed a smoke before moving on to the next stage of the murder. The two men then placed Yolanta's head into a plastic bag. They left the apartment, boarded a bus, and made their way to the coast, which of course means they sat on a bus full of people for a prolonged period of time with a severed head on their lap. They then walked to the coastline and threw Yolanta's head into the ocean. The two men then walked further up the coastline and threw the hands, which were wrapped in a plastic bag, into the ocean too, hoping that the head and hands would never be found. But there was more that needed to be done. Next, the two men contacted an unsuspecting friend. They asked this friend if they could borrow his car, as Alex was moving apartment. The unsuspecting friend agreed, having no idea what his vehicle would really be used for. The two men packed Yolanta's torso into a suitcase, placed her into the boot of the car, and then drove into the town centre. The men then walked with the suitcase to the harbour and threw the suitcase into the water, again hoping that the remains would never be found. The two men then cleared Yolanta's apartment of all her belongings, making it look like she had up and left. The two men were under the impression that no one would report Yolanta missing, at least not for a long time anyway, and with her body parts disposed of in the sea, they believed that they had committed the perfect crime. But justice for Yolanta would be swift. Just days after the disposal of Yolanta, there was a storm which would wash Yolanta's body parts upon the shoreline faster than the two killers could ever have anticipated. On a windy day, just days after the murder, two sisters were running along the beach when they noticed a plastic bag. The sisters opened the bag, only to find the decomposing, severed head of Yolanta. The two sisters were only 11 and 8. They turned around and ran in horror to their mother, who made a call to the police. But of course, the date was the 1st of April, April Fool's Day. The police call centre received the phone call and radioed in for officers to go to the beach. But some were under the impression that this could be some kind of twisted prank. But nevertheless, the police were soon on the scene. Upon seeing the head, officers couldn't tell if it was plastic or a real human head. But as they got closer, they were soon able to determine what it was. This was no prank, and with that, a murder investigation team was soon on site. Over 80 investigators were called in. It was clear that this was a callous and brutal murder, and the police wanted to solve this as swiftly as possible. Just up the shoreline, Yolanta's hands were also found by the police as they combed for evidence. Yolanta's head was taken to a lab where DNA samples were taken. The remains of the head were then analysed, and a recreation of what she looked like was made. The similarities were striking. With the recreation made, the police were going to appeal to the public, hoping that someone would recognise her and come forward to give an identification. But before the police could share the image, a fellow police officer recognised her immediately. The police officer said, "That's Yolanta." Yolanta was known to the police. On a number of occasions, she had helped the police as a translator. She was well liked by the officers who she worked with. The police contacted some friends and colleagues of Yolanta's, who said they had not seen her for some time, but they had simply assumed she had moved on and began work on another farm, something that was common for such workers. With this identification, police officers found where she lived and went to her home. The police found the apartment almost empty, and it seemed like the apartment had been thoroughly cleaned, although one investigator noticed a small blood spatter on a door frame. This sample was tested, and the DNA was a match with the body parts the investigators found. With this, they were certain that the body was Yolanta. The apartment was searched further. There appeared to be traces of blood on the carpet, but it was hardly visible due to the carpet being cleaned. The carpet was then pulled up, which exposed the underlay. There they found blood saturated into the flooring. Diluted blood spatters were also found in the bathroom, indicating that this was where the body had been dismembered. Blood spatter analysis indicated that Yolanta could have been alive when she was decapitated, but perhaps not conscious. Outside the apartment, the police found a wheelie bin. Inside this wheelie bin, they discovered a plastic bag filled with clothing belonging to Yolanta, along with duct tape with human hair stuck to the adhesive. This hair belonged to Yolanta, but on the non-sticky side of the tape, the police found fingerprints. Whoever these fingerprints belonged to was likely the one who had killed Yolanta. The police had gathered a large amount of evidence in a relatively short period of time. There was enough to help them find the person responsible. News of the murder spread quickly. Detective Chief Inspector Graham Macmillan told the media, "This woman came to Scotland seeking a better life. I am determined that justice will be served." Investigators began speaking to those who were close with Yolanta, which there weren't many, so Alex was brought in quickly, and he was asked if he knew anything about the murder of his friend. Right away, investigators realized that Alex seemed to be nervous. He denied doing anything to her, but he didn't seem to be telling the whole truth. The police decided to press, and before too long, Alex began to crack. He came clean. Well, he told the police that he was involved in the murder of Yolanta, but that it was his friend Vitus who had actually killed and dismembered her. The police did a background check on Vitus, and they noticed that he had killed before, and that he was a man capable of extreme violence. Alex gave a timeline to the police, telling them where and when they disposed of the body parts. The harbour was searched by a team of divers who were able to uncover the suitcase in the water. Alex also told investigators where they had disposed of the weapons that were used to hack through Yolanta's body. These weapons were recovered in a river. Hours and hours of CCTV was then analysed, and there they found footage of the two men walking around disposing of the body. With the full body recovered, the police were able to corroborate what Alex had said. The two men had killed Yolanta. She had been bound and gagged, tortured, murdered, and dismembered in a brutal, calculated attack. Vitus was soon arrested. He was questioned by the police, but despite the overwhelming evidence, he tried to deny that he was involved at all. But the police literally had CCTV of him carrying the suitcase with Yolanta's body inside, and holding onto her head on a bus. The investigators gave Vitus a chance to confess, but he refused. The police would later say that he seemed cold, having no remorse for his actions. The trial would soon begin. During the proceedings, Alex gave his version of events. He didn't fully pin the murder on Vitus, and in his confession he massively implicated himself. He gave details as to how the murder was carried out. His confession was vital in the case. Vitus, however, continued to deny any involvement. In court, the judge described Vitus as truly monstrous, and said, "With chilling composure and determination you put this evil plan into effect. Jolanta must have died in a state of terror and distress. It is clear that her ordeal at your hands must have lasted for a considerable amount of time. I'm left in no doubt that you absolutely have no respect for human life or decency. At no stage have you shown the slightest remorse." It's reported that as this was being said, Vitus sat with his head bowed in the dock. Alex was found guilty for his role in the crime. He was sentenced to a minimum term of 20 years in prison. Vitus too was found guilty. He was sentenced to life with a minimum term of 28 years. Following the sentencing, Alex made an appeal. He argued that due to his cooperation with law enforcement, he should have been given a more lenient sentence, and those in charge of the appeal process somehow agreed. His sentence was reduced from 20 years to 18 years. Many found this to be a grave injustice for Yolanta, especially considering the callous and gruesome nature of the murder. As I mentioned before, it was two young girls who discovered the severed head of Yolanta. The mother of the two girls has stated that they struggled with what they saw. Thankfully, therapy was arranged for them both, as I can imagine that seeing something as gruesome as that in their younger years has left quite an impact on their mental states. Since being incarcerated, Vitus has tried to garner some media attention in regards to his treatment inside prison in Scotland. He has claimed he was left without access to money and a TV whilst he was imprisoned. He also claimed that many of his human rights were violated. He has also stated that much of his jewelry was stolen by the authorities and that he wasn't given it back, which is all super duper sad to hear. Anyways, he was subsequently deported back to Lithuania, where he will carry out the remainder of his sentence, and it's reported that he isn't having a great time there either. In 2015, Vitus began writing to the media again. He wrote a 14-page letter from behind prison bars, blaming Yolanta for her own death and calling her the guiltiest person in all of this situation, and went on to say, "Because of Yolanta, I will stay in prison for the rest of my life. Nobody planned to kill and rob her at all. This was never a planned crime. It is all lies that Alex said. He blamed me in all of these things that never happened." In this 14-page letter, Vitus never once directly denies killing Yolanta, but he does claim that the life sentence he was given is too much. Vitus went on to claim that Yolanta had stolen bank cards from him in the weeks before she was killed, and went on to say that he never mentioned this in the trial as he didn't think the courts would believe him over Alex's story. He is now saying that he just wants everyone to know the real story of that crime. However, as far as I can tell, there is no evidence that Yolanta stole credit cards from Vitus. The 14-page letter is believed to be nothing but a narcissistic ramble of a cold-blooded, selfish killer, hell-bent on absolving himself of any accountability for his actions. It is likely that Vitus will never be released, as he is deemed far too dangerous to be part of a free society. The case of Yolanta was in every sense of the word senseless. In the end, the two killers were only able to steal a few £100s from her bank account. What is also terrifying to think is that members of the public were going about their day walking around the town centre in broad daylight, totally unaware that they were walking past two murderers, carrying around the mutilated corpse of an innocent woman.